Welcome. My name is Peter McCready. I was born in Peter, lived here most of my life, proud to call it home. And I want to start off by thanking Amanda and Jill at the Picks and the gallery. We're very fortunate to have a facility like this in this town. It's a great place. And go Picks, go gallery. I'd also like to thank, we have several food sponsors: Rebecca's Food Nutrition Source, Alma Hill Bakery, the Mulefoot Gastropub in Imlay City. So you're welcome to gather snacks and drinks, and we have a couple of red wines and a white, and some local microbrew from Lake Orion, and good old Stroh's. So you're welcome to bring food and drink inside or step out if you need to. I'd also like to thank the 94 people who showed up this morning and picked trash for 3 hours for our annual Flint River Watershed Coalition annual cleanup. We filled we filled a whole 9-yard dumpster and another half a dumpster. And the most exciting thing I think about that event is that more than 3/4 of the participants were grade school students. We would also really like to thank you folks for coming out here today. It is very easy in this day and age to stay at home. It's very easy to get your entertainment and your information from our giant televisions and from our phones. And the point of today's engagement, we want a chance to get together, to hear some local, real people talk about their experience with this issue that's important to all of us. And we appreciate you taking the time and effort to be here and to learn and to be aware of the place that we live. In addition to this space, we made sure that we had some space next door in the gallery. If you have an issue that you're already aware of, or you need to step out, or there's somebody you want to talk to, we've got that space so that you can hang out with people and get to know them, and also to ask questions or participate in the 3 sponsoring organizations for this event: the Flint River Watershed Coalition, Lapeer Land Conservancy, and the Sierra Club. So thank you to those organizations. They're the ones that rented the space and planned the program and have facilitated this. So, thank you. And then lastly, our speakers. Our speakers today are local folks who have volunteered their time to come out and share their experience, and we're grateful for that. We'd like to start with Paul Young. Thanks, Paul. Thanks.
All right, can you hear me out there? Good. Probably don't even need this thing. Good evening. My name's Paul Young, and Dean Suzanne is a friend of mine. He asked me to come here today to share with you the story about the day when I came across the Encana oil fracking site located along the Manistee River. I'm a ceramic artist, and when I'm not making pots, I enjoy fly fishing. 2 years ago, I turned off the highway coming out of Grayling on the Sunset Trail. Sunset Trail, it's a small dusty dirt road, meanders through the woods alongside the beautiful Manistee River. And after about 10 miles, the road crosses the CCC Bridge. I know this road well because I've traveled it countless times to this campsite along the river at the CCC. I've camped there with my young son, sometimes for as much as a week at a time. It's there the 2 of us learned to fish using flies. Many of them I tied myself. And it's where we drop whatever trouble, the year, the age, the moment, had brought to us when we reconnect over a late night fire. My son Dylan learned to drive on that road when he was about 9 years old. I would let him drive the truck from the campsite back to the main road. And believe me, the trees were never so big and they were never so close to the road. The last time we fished the man together was the year before he graduated from college. We've spent a lot of time on the Manistee River. 2 years ago, I turned down that road with a good friend of mine, Jim. We were on our way to have the truck spotted so that it would be there at the end of our day after fishing and floating down the river in a drift boat. I felt disbelief when I realized that the road was twice the size that it had been before. I said, who would want to build a highway out in the woods here? And before long, we spied this large berm. We couldn't see over the berm. We couldn't see what was on the other side. After a while, we came to a break in the embankment. It allowed us to see into the opening there. And it looked like this industrial site out in the middle of the woods. And I have to be honest, I don't really remember all the details of what was on the site, what was there. You know, I'd never seen a fracking site before. But what I do recall was the anguish that came over me. Because I did know what this was. You know, I'd read about fracking and its destruction. But I was familiar with what was happening in New York and PA, things that weren't here, you know. I said, this can't be happening in Michigan, not on the Manistee. And that was 2 years ago. That was my wake-up call. Moving forward, I've tried to educate myself about the industry, about the environmental impacts, and about our government and their role in this. Today, you'll have an opportunity to hear from people who've been affected. You'll learn about the science involved in fracking and where to find resources to become more knowledgeable yourself. The head of the Michigan Well Drillers Association will tell us about hydrology in Michigan and how it relates to fracking. And you'll see a film about fracking and its effects around the world. Is today your wake-up call? We need to know the truth about fracking and the potential threat to our children and ourselves. And I'd also like to read something serendipitously. I opened the paper yesterday, the local paper, the county press, and in the editorial was this, and I thought it really related well because this was also an up north experience similar to my own, only maybe a little farther down the road. It's titled, Stand Up to Companies. Let me tell you a little story. My family owns 600 acres on 3 parcels between Petoskey and Gaylord. We've had this property in the family for decades and built 2 homes up there, but now we wish we hadn't. While we knew there was oil and gas pipelines near us and some well sites, we had no idea how bad things could get. They fracked 2 wells down the road from us, north of Elmira, and that was the start of the trouble. In less than 3 months, our water pressure dropped. There's frequently foul smell in the air, and hundreds of trucks that pass the house make it impossible to sit outside and enjoy the peace of northern Michigan living. Between the noise, the dust, and the smell of the leaking tanker trucks, we're pretty much forced to stay indoors, even though our dream house overlooks a river valley that is something out of a painting. The oil guys told us they would repair the roads. That was 14 years ago. And guess what? Nothing. While the well has long been drilled and fracked, what they're doing now is trucking in load after load of contaminated water from other sites, pumping it into the ground only 600 yards from our place. The headlights from these trucks can be seen through the trees as they do this all night long. They don't care that you're trying to sleep. As far as I'm concerned, they don't care about anything but putting as much crap into the ground as they can before the wells fail and leak into the ground. In the time we've been there have been 7 spills on the surface near the well site. My advice to local officials is to make sure they demand these companies purchase bonds to repair the roads that they will destroy. In one day last summer, we counted 443 semi-trucks into the site. So, I'm not sure who comes up here next. So thank you for your time.
Ann and Dean Susannis have been at this a while. They spent their whole life as educators. Dean spending a little bit of time with tennis to several decades, and Ann with a lasting legacy as the nature educator at Kingsbury School. And they have some experience with fracking that they're going to share with us now. Thank you.
I'm not Ann. I'm going to go first. When Paul told me this a little over a year ago, I said, nah, that can't be. Not on our public land. And I've always been a little naive about stuff, but not really. And but I did think, like this Pure Michigan campaign, I kind of believe in it. I think it's really cool. And I thought, how could they be doing that on our public land? And but they are, and as you all know, they're thinking about it right now in the pier. So anyway, Ann and I, it's a longer story than that, but got involved. We started learning about it and reading about it, and I'd have her wherever we drove or at home. She'd be sitting next to me reading off the phone, these long articles. And so we started learning more and more about it. We went to a lot of meetings, to industry meetings, government meetings, education meetings, and environmental meetings. And then we also put on a show for our little community, Dryden, for our farmers. And we knew something. We didn't know a lot to start with. We learned a lot. And then we had more questions. At that time, I started off that speech that there's this light coming. And is it this fracking light, is it a train? Is it a train? Is it coming? Is the light getting any brighter? And that was a year and a half ago. And I'll have to tell you that that light's still there. Is it coming? I don't know. Did it reach the end of the line? To be honest with you, I don't know. That is there a reason for them to come here? I don't know. And we've asked everybody about it. Are they just stalling? Are they just taking the time out? Don't know. Is it because of the prices being low? Maybe. Is it because the landmen haven't got enough land patched together? Maybe. I don't know. But the landmen, for sure, are here. They're everywhere. And they must be up to something. Maybe not. But I'd like to tell you what we learned. And I'd like to start not with the kind of hard stuff or objective stuff. I want to start with what I think is the more important stuff, the hopeful stuff. And this is what I learned. I learned that we have a lot of really good people that listen. And I decided after having met all of them and watched them listening that that's all that mattered. I didn't care if they changed their minds because I wasn't trying to at the time. I just cared that they became added to all the people that were thinking about this. I cared that they had the patience and that to listen as they did. And I'd like to tell you who they were. Some of them start with their own township supervisor. Hours of listening to my wife, to me. And then she got Representative Daley to come see us. And he spent 2 solid hours by himself listening and asking questions. And that to me is good enough because he's thinking about this. And our neighbors, our farmers, same thing. We went to meetings of all kinds, and I would listen to how they listened and how they asked questions. So I think we're adding a lot of people. We had a geologist that we ran into at a university talk and asked him some questions, and he came to our house and answered our questions for a few hours. And then, I hate to say this in front of some of you, but the DEQ, in spite of all the things that they can't quite do right, they had lots of good people that tried to answer as many questions as they could within their framework. And then Michigan State Extension. And then, in our own community, our two newspapers, Lapeer and Tri-City Times, the people that put that together, the fact that we exist today, spent hours not only listening to us, but also researching it for themselves. So we really appreciate that. Okay, anyway, now I'd like to tell you a little bit of what I learned about fracking. And I'd like to point out that the title of the show is Fracking in Your Backyard, ? Well, the question, I don't know an answer. I don't know what the answer is. Is it something we should worry about or not yet? But is it over for Lapeer? I don't know. Is it in our backyard? I don't know, but I'll tell you what we think. And more importantly, is it fracking? Because maybe something else in your backyard that you ought to be worried about. And I'll have to say that I paused many times and recalibrated what I was thinking, because I really want to know the right things. You know, I want to be straight about all this. And I've come to some slight new conclusions of what is important. And I'd like to now give you the kind of presentation I would give if you were like my students. So I have 4 slides. 2 of them are excellent because I didn't make them, and the other 2 are really crummy. And fortunately, all of the other 2 are on the front and back of the white sheet that you have in front of you. And so I'm going to ask you to look at that when we get to it. So, yeah, like the first slide. That's not quite it there. No, you don't have to. There's another. There. All right, good enough. The DEQ has a real nice map that shows the past and all the drilling that's been done in Michigan, all the punching of holes. There have been millions of holes punched in this country, and certainly many tens of thousands in our state. And you should know, because the DEQ will tell you, that's the Department of Environmental Quality, will tell you that we've been fracking since 1947, and that's a true statement. And there are, right there, 12,000 fracked wells starting in 1947. There are lots of other oil and gas wells there on that map as well. But the first slide is just for me to be able to tell you that the state already has been punched with these wells. Now, on the second slide, which really didn't work out, you have this piece of paper that if you hold vertically, that's what the slide should be, the second slide. Okay, you blew it up.
All right.
Okay, I just be able to point to it. All right. Well, that's part of that page. And what you'll see on the top of your sheet, and which you probably can't see so well, but right up there, that we've been drilling for a long time, from 47 till now, really. These old conventional wells that are fracking wells, I call them grandma's wells. They're about 800 feet deep on the average. They use about 30,000 gallons on the average. So a lot of the industry and the DEQ will tell you we've been doing this for a long time. Yes, we've been fracking. They used to frack those wells. The technology is kind of interesting. They push down a fluid, and they put a tremendous pressure, and the fluid would squirt out of these holes, and they would break the rocks, and it would release the gas. And they would do it and punch a hole here and then punch a hole there and so on. There's some distance they had to be between each other. And on the average, they were 800 plus feet deep. The new unconventional wells started being a big process in this country, a huge process. First of all, they can average 12 times deeper, like 2 miles. They use, the last one approved in Michigan, uses as much water as 1,000 of the old conventional one do. They use 30 million gallons that they have to use. And the new unconventional ones have lots of new technology attached to them, besides shoving water down and making it blast the rock apart at the bottom, which is called hydraulic fracking. On your sheet, there are 4 stars. The first one says, it's different because it's huge. It's a huge industry. It's a huge, as you already heard from Paul, it's thousands of truck trips for some of these big wells. So it's a high volume operation. The other thing is, because water isn't really that slippery, to go down 2 miles and then to go over 2 miles horizontally or more, they need to make the water slipperier. Even if they use hundreds or 100,000 pounds per square inch to blast the pressure down, they still can't push it well enough unless they make the water slipperier. So they do that by adding to what they used to have. They used to have plenty of water, and then they would have sand, which holds the cracks open when it goes into the cracks. And they would have some other chemicals, some hydrogen chloride and other chemicals to either keep the holes open and or to keep some bacteria or things like that growing. But now what they've added to make it slipperier are some very difficult chemicals in very small quantities, like 0.1 type percents and things like that, like benzene and toluene and things like that. The big point about those chemicals is in 2005, they don't have to tell you what they are. They are proprietary. In the United States, if they want to not tell you what those chemicals are, they don't have to. And these are the ones that people are really scared of because they are carcinogenic. Anyway, they blast the thing down around a curve. That's the other new technology. They're able to change the direction. They don't just go straight down like an old grandma's well. They go around and they can go 2 or 3 miles sideways, up and down even some, and do their fracking. So that's really cool. It's neat technology that they got. And then the 4th star, which is not up there, but is on your paper, and I don't know, I think they tried it in Michigan, and it might actually have resulted in a lawsuit, which is ongoing, but it certainly has been true all over the West, Wyoming and Texas, and that is every 17 feet in some states, they can put another one of these on the same pad, and the pad is about 6 acres. Again, it's not a little square like your old wells. It's a 6 acre plus area. Anyway, it's a big operation. That's the biggest thing you should know, and it changes the character of the community. In fact, one of the latest places that really took off is in the northwest corner of North Dakota, where Teddy Roosevelt used to do what Paul Young did with his son. He'd go there to find himself and stuff like that. And when you looked at North Dakota from the sky, it was black. And if you were in North Dakota, you could look at the sky because it was black. But not anymore. From the sky. And now if you show slide 2, this is a better slide. There's Chicago, Minneapolis, and there are the gas fields. They used to be black. In North Dakota today, it is lit up all the time. By the way, they're fracking for oil there, and some of their waste includes methane, and they've been burning it off, and North Dakota is trying to get them to slow down on that. That's slide 2. All right. That's slide 3, actually. We're moving right along. All right, finally, slide 4 will be what I want to talk about most. If you will look at the other side of your white paper, what I did is what I've always kind of like to do as a teacher, break things up and how you should look at it. In fact, there's an actual formal discussion in universities about how people should talk about fracking, because words can get in the way and things are included that shouldn't be. But what I'd like you to think of it is, when you hear people talking about it, and they say, well, whatever they say about it, are they talking about the input side? Are they talking about the on-site? Or are they talking about the output side? And I'll tell you from the get-go, the industry and the DEQ mostly talk about the on-site part. The University of Michigan was ready to talk about the input and the on-site part. What you'll hear today, not from me, from somebody well versed on, is more about the output side, and that is actually the thing that I think is the big issue. The big time bomb is on the output side. Fracking is bad enough in some ways. It's really good if it works, really good like they say, but it's the output side that everybody should worry about, and I'd like to explain how. So I'd like to start with the input, say a few things about the input side. The input is what comes to the site. Well, water for sure. In some states they truck it. In our state they expect to drill right next to your site, wherever they can get somebody to allow them to drill and take your water. Our water, Michigan water. The chemicals and sand come in with trucks, and as you've heard, there could be thousands for each well because it's such a big operation. And lots of people come in. Many of them are experts. They go from state to state, they put up the rigs. Many of them are almost like day laborers, run the trucks. And so, as you see underneath, there are concerns, and you can talk about each of the concerns at length. I'm not gonna. But groundwater depletion, this is the only thing I can tell you. We have an old way of doing it for small wells. We don't have a new way that's needed, and hopefully that will come up. The unknown chemicals, I mentioned that. Accidents are a big deal. They're a big deal. And in fact, there was one in Pennsylvania this week, and 3 trucks involved in the operation ran into each other, carrying on the other end the waste loads. And that's kind of hard to believe, but that did happen. It happens all the time. And you will hear the industry say, we never had a problem on site. And sometimes what they say is true, but that's not true. But they leave out that a lot of their workers and a lot of spills occurred on the input side. Again, I could talk about that in length. Let's look at on-site, which I already started talking about. There have to be roads, if it's across your property, built to the site, and it's usually 6 acres or more. And it's in Pennsylvania, well, I'll get back to Pennsylvania. Wait. Anyway, they store the water in pits. They store the chemicals in tanks. They bring the pipes on, lots of trucks. This is just schematic. There's cement, sand. I'm probably leaving things out, drilling. There's the doghouse, which is where the guys run their computers, and they're connected to somewhere down in Texas sometimes, with geology that is suspect sometimes. There are the man camps where the people stay, and sometimes these look like huge, huge trailer parks in some of the states. You see, in some of the places, like there's this one county which in Wyoming has 27,000 wells. Right now, that train is in the distance. We only have 15 that have been approved. Well, 53, I guess, are on the table, but 15 have been approved or they're about to do in Michigan. So it's still a light out there. And then, you know, there's a waste storage. In Michigan, they have to store it inside of tanks. And the waste, when they push the water down, that dirty water down, the numbers you'll hear are all over the place, but about 50% of it comes back up, and they have to contain it and then ship it away. And sometimes there are such huge pressures that there are spills on site. And but again, then there are pipes going out, which you heard Paul speak about, and you will see later with Gary some dramatic pictures of the pipes. And where do they go? Processing plants. And that's a whole story to get into what's happened in Texas with processing plants and all the volatiles they release and how you can almost not protect yourself from them. There's something in the news this week about it, and I'll mention it in a few minutes. But what was a boom can be a bust, because once the wells are done, people do leave, and that's the reason I drew the people there. But the big thing I want you to get out from me anyway today, and probably from Joe, is the next thing, which is the injection wells. The injection wells. That's where they put the stuff. The injection wells. And what are they? Well, they're old dry wells or exhausted wells or brine wells, and they exist everywhere. There are holes in the ground, and there are millions of holes in the ground all over this country, including in Michigan, including in Lapeer County. And in fact, there are 2 operating injection wells right here in the county, and in fact, one of them, which had a failure not that long ago, but they fixed it and put some wells around it to monitor the injection well. It goes only down about 1,700 feet in Mayfield Township. It has already received stuff from one of the first fracking wells in Michigan. And what I want to say, and I know Joe's going to talk about it at length, but I want to say that to me, this is the time bomb. And it really doesn't matter if they frack in Lapeer or not, because no matter where they do fracking or not fracking, because they could come for oil here, doesn't matter. There's going to be waste. And the waste is going to go in injection wells, because that is the answer since they stopped letting people, companies dump their stuff into rivers and streams. Their new solution was to go underground where things would go away forever. Turns out, the geologists all over the country don't think that forever is the right word. There's a river of bad stuff all over this country. In Florida, there's been spectacular failures. Maybe Joe will talk about them. There have been earthquakes. He will talk about them. But the thing is, it's a time bomb. You can't put something away forever. It's spreading out in plumes, and it might not be here for 50 years or 20, or it could be right away, or it could be a longer time. I know the nuclear waste, which got everybody's attention during my whole career, they still don't know where to put it. And I don't see this stuff as being any less harmful than even nuclear waste. So, but the thing is, we've had injection wells, and we've been putting oil into them and haven't had the kind of attention the nuclear waste got, and I hope that that comes. Let me see if I got a couple more notes about that. We could talk about injection wells for an hour, and I do want to say that in all the processes, fracking and injection wells, one of the biggest things that every farmer knows is they use for protection cement. It's called cement casing, and every farmer knows that in 100 years it's done. The industry publishes that 6% of their fracking wells fail the first year at the cement casing, which is supposed to protect the upwelling of whatever might come flying up from below. So to me, I do want you, before I do my last thoughts, to know that I think I've learned that the biggest thing we should care about is injection wells, because we're leaving a time bomb for our kids and grandkids and everybody else of poisoning their water. All right, well, that's the main presentation I have. Let me just a few quick thoughts. First of all, the industry has invented some cool things, and they go ahead and do it, but the science is nowhere near People that invented some of this stuff are saying we cannot keep up with it, and the industry's going ahead with our inventions and doing stuff they shouldn't be doing with it, and because we don't know enough about geology. In Lapeer, we have the A1 carbonate shale underneath us. I do not know the answer. I've talked to so many people, geologists and others. Is it got oil? Is it got gas? Is it going to be productive? What does it have? And will they go down to it? There's a lot of oil around here. We know that they're going underneath in Rochester, right underneath, subdivisions. That's what they want to do anyway, and they're fighting it right now. Because there's lots of oil that they've done. But these are big operations because now they can do the horizontal drilling. It doesn't have to be fracking. So I don't know what they're going to do here, but I do think that we should watch out minimally for injection wells. The geology of Michigan is messy. There are a lot of faults. There are a lot of fissures. And, it's not like textbooks. No geology is like textbooks like this. It changes, it folds, it disappears and reappears, and constantly surprises geologists by being permeable when they thought it wasn't going to be. And there are all these old wells that were drilled, either successfully or not, all over the countryside, and some of the records of where they are have been lost. And they become conduits for some of this stuff that we're putting down there. Another thing, where the industry is way ahead of all of us, the media, everybody, it was in our papers on April 7th in the news right in front of the Free Press, and that was CO2. They're going to let the industry put CO2 pipes wherever they want. How come? Well, you read the paper, it's to push more oil out of exhausted wells. Well, that may be true, but I also know that it's also been talked about as an alternative for fracking fluid. So I don't know what they're going to do. All I know is that our legislators passed something to allow the industry to put their pipes of CO2 wherever they want. CO2 is not toxic, but it has killed animals and stuff because you get asphyxiated from CO2 if there's a leak. And leaks are the order of business. We read about greenhouse. I got to tell you, pick your poison, oil, gas, or coal. They're all out to make money. It really doesn't matter which one. It doesn't matter if you care about greenhouse. There's no real bridge. As far as solar goes, it would have been nice if we would have supported. We had a hero in our state at Troy, Michigan, a guy named Obashinsky, who was a hero. He was a self-made, educated man, and he was feted all over the world, especially in Asia, for what he knew about and his business of solar. He just died, by the way. He was in the business of solar. I think his business was called energy conversions or avonics. And he was unknown here because he couldn't get any help from the U.S., even though the oil industry always does. And right now, just to show you how complicated this is, forget Mr. Obashinsky. You want to buy solar stuff? Well, the businesses that were making the solar stuff have gone out of business, but the businesses selling it from China are doing okay. And so, I don't know, because next you get into security, national security, which immediately the industry says we're going to be helped with. Well, I don't know. It seems to me that they're setting up ports, and they're using even the Ukrainian crisis to set up liquid natural gas ports, which are really dangerous things. You could bring down the whole city if it went on blue. But anyway, they're setting them up and trying to get the Congress to let them set up. Why? To export. Where? Not Ukraine. The price is too low even there. Asia. Brazil. So it's really complicated. Jobs, I could talk about a long time. Mostly I don't get it. It's too complicated. In the news, I just mentioned the 3 tankers. In the news yesterday, I think, somebody, and the reason I bring this up, somebody won, that's in the movie tonight, the Parr family in Texas won a $3 million settlement from the oil industry. And the reason I want to mention it is, a lot of the data that scientists could use is missing because every time there's a problem, so many times the problem is solved by settlements. And so the settlements, they sign contracts of non-disclosure with the people, even their kids. And so that data is gone. And so these people, they got this $3 million settlement, good for them, and they seem very brave. But you know what? They're going to face appeals. And at some point, they might too settle because of either health reasons or money reasons. You know, all the lawyers and all that. You can't keep up with the lawyers. So that is a problem. I think nationally, we should not have non-disclosure contracts so we know what's going on with our neighbors. And then finally, I'd like to mention what can you do? Because I really like to think positively. And I did mention there are a lot of good people everywhere. And where are they mostly? They're your neighbors. They're you. You should take care of your land. And there are some folks going to talk about that. You should talk to your neighbors, talk to your township, and you should call up the DEQ, which has its own problems. For example, used to have Mr. Hal Fitch even told us, used to have over 100 people working for them. These are the people monitoring all this stuff. Now they're down to 40. So you should talk to them. And because you will become their monitors. They expect you to. Injection wells, they only inspect them every 5 years. So lots can happen in 5 years. So you have to become the stewards of what you know. I think that's the best deal. And by the way, the next person I know is Ann, and she's got 5 minutes. She'd like to, can I go way over? Okay. All right. This is Ann, who will give you some things to do and a little more objective.
Good afternoon. I am Ann, and Dean and I have been working together for over a year on this. I'm only going to say a couple of things. First of all, with all he said and with all we've read and heard from other people, we've really become aware that the whole idea of hydraulic fracking is a big, complex issue. It's advancing through our state and now possibly into our county. Every day, and Dina said this, we have more information and especially we have more questions. The questions keep coming up. What's going to happen in our county? We just keep looking and you can find more information every day. One thing that we have realized though, that the permitting and leasing and even the drilling have gone way ahead of the science, the knowledge, and the public involvement. It's very heartening to come to an audience like this today. When I first went to a meeting in 2012, everybody was walking out of there saying, boy, I never knew anything about fracking until now. Now, Lapeer County and Genesee County have had a number of programs recently, and I really appreciate Oregon Township and the other townships and municipalities that have sponsored these kinds of programs at their meetings to help people become informed, because that's one of the best ways to ultimately result in healthy action for our environment. Just a few practical things that we learned. One of the first meetings we went to was in Caro a year ago in January. And the folks there from the DEQ and from MSU Extension talked about how leasing could bring you some money possibly, but then they went on with all these precautions, all these warnings for us to think about. One of them was find out if you own your mineral rights. The mineral rights underneath on the surface of your land. That's not so easy to do. You can do a title search, but these are expensive and sometimes they're left out of the title. So that was one precaution we were given. Also, we were advised to test our well water. If anybody approached us, if a landman approached us or approached our neighbor or nearby property, that we should test our water ahead of time, prior to any drilling or any work in the area. And there is out on the table, the information table in the art gallery, there is a couple of handouts from the DEQ about how to go about testing your water. Why should you test it prior? Because if anything happens to your water during this process of drilling or fracking or anything connected with it, the burden of proof is on you. The burden of proof is on the landowner. Also, we were cautioned to consult an oil or gas attorney to help us understand the lease if we were interested. And we were told that we might get pressured by the leasing company. They might say, well, your neighbors have signed, there's only a limited time to do this, your relatives signed, but be sure to check out everything you are told. Don't allow yourself to be intimidated. And then, apart from those warnings that we received, there were all the surfacing impacts, which Dean mentioned. The impacts on the roads with the truck traffic, the noise, the dust, potential air and water pollution, the possibility of leaks from failed well casings, spills from trucks, high volumes of water that are required in this high volume hydraulic fracturing, lowering of property values, the impact on your neighbors, changes in the community that would come with industrialization, and impact on farm livelihood. And then, of course, the underground impacts. What about the injection wells? So how do we start to get some information? Well, this meeting is a great place to start. There's excellent resources right here in this room. Out in the art gallery, you'll see a lot of information from a national organization called Food and Water Watch. Food and Water Watch has an office in Michigan. They are happy to answer your questions. They sent us a lot of information that I encourage you to take. The Sierra Club also has information. Sierra Club has a really interesting event called Lobby Day, once or twice a year, in which folks who are interested can go to Lansing and meet with their legislators to express their concerns about various issues. And fracking has been on the agenda several times. FLOW is another organization based in Traverse City. It focuses on scientific and legal research having to do with water issues. Basically, it helps townships and municipalities to learn what they can do and not do. And it helps to empower them to enact legislation, to enact ordinances and other rules that can help if fracking or drilling is in their community, how to have some control of it. Tip of the Watershed Council has been around for a long time, has a lot of good basic information about the issue of fracking. Grobel Environmental. I'm guessing that a number of you heard Dr. Chris Grobel, who spoke at recent meetings about fracking in our area. And I want to thank Linda Berker for making it possible for him to come in. He works in the area of environmental law and environmental policy, and he's been an expert in cases involving hydrofracking. I mentioned MSU Extension. Some of you may have heard Curtis Talley, who's with MSU Extension. He's got a lot of information and a lot of links. So that's another good resource. The DEQ, the permitting agency for these wells, their website has all kinds of information. They're the ones that I got the water testing information from. The DNR, I spoke a number of times to their geologist on the phone to try to find out more about the geology of Lapeer County and the issues that apply to us. One online resource that I'll mention is called ProPublica. That had a really good article about injection wells, and we have used that as a good source of information. And then two that are not on the schedule, the program that you have, the yellow sheet. One is Anglers of the Asabo, which works in the area of conservation as well as fishing. And then there's a fairly new one, respectmyplanet.org, that has information on geological formations, Michigan oil and gas wells, and their status. So what can we do? We have these resources. We can use them to learn more. We can ask questions. and I keep trying to find out more of the specifics about Lapeer County. Whatever happens here will have a big impact on our roads, on our water, on our communities. I think it's very important to continue to communicate and work with our neighbors and work with our local officials. Our concerns are their concerns. We want to encourage our officials and work with them if possible to enact ordinances and set restrictions to protect the health, safety, welfare of our communities, ourselves, our water, and our environment. And I think that our local involvement is critical because we know the people in our communities. We know the officials, the agencies that have to have this information. And as more of us stand up and get involved, we can have, I hope, a greater impact for sharing information, expressing our concerns, getting heard, and taking action. Thank you.
Joe Curry is a professional water well driller, drilling and repairing water wells in Michigan for over 30 years, and registered as a water well driller by the state of Michigan for over 20 years. He serves as the director of Michigan Groundwater Association. He's a certified member of the National Groundwater Association and a member of the Nationally Accredited Water Systems Council. He's got 2 dogs, 2 horses, and 1 lovely wife.
Thank you for that great introduction. Okay, first of all, well, I really like to see a nice crowd out there like that. Thanks for everybody for showing up out here today. Of these people out here today, I would like to see just a show of hands to get a general idea of how many local representatives are here with us today. A couple show of hands there. Thank you for being here. That's very important. How many state representatives do we have here today? Learning what's going on.
I'm running for state rep.
Yes, we got 1 running for state rep. Nobody here that's the actual state rep. And how many local and state health department or DEQ or regulators? Anybody here today from the local health departments? Not here either. The reason why I say that is because there's so much information going on out there that is from the, the $1 million ads that are on our TVs and stuff. And if those people aren't here getting this information from us and the citizens and all that, they're there getting that information. And that's all they're learning, okay? So it's always important to take a look to see who's here today. How many are concerned citizens that are here today? Very nice. You see there? That's we're all here. Let's see, and of course, I'm a professional well driller, like you said here. I'm not a professional speaker or nothing like that. So when I blunder up here, just forgive me. I will stumble and pick myself back up here, but I'm not a professional speaker. First, I'd like to thank Ann and Dean Susannis for having this and for the Pix Theater for facilitating this here today for us. And for giving me the opportunity to comment on this very important issue of gas and oil drilling being entertained not only in Michigan, but in Lapeer County. I'd also like to thank everyone here today for taking their time out of their busy everyday lives to attend. I would like to comment on the methods used today to extract the gas and oil and the environmental risk that it poses. Millions of people within Michigan and our Great Lakes Basin survive their everyday lives through our pristine groundwater and our beautiful Great Lakes. Many townships within this county and throughout the state of Michigan financially survive on the sales of municipal well water or groundwater to their citizens. I would hope that our public officials have begun to gain some knowledge on this new controversial gas and oil extraction technique that threatens this groundwater supply. But from what I've seen, heard, and read, it is telling me that Michigan is irresponsibly allowing the gas and oil exploration of our counties and state without fully understanding and regulating the entire process of slickwater horizontal hydraulic fracturing, or the uniquely delicate geological makeup of Michigan, including our Great Lakes Basin. I would like to clear up some misleading comments, or what I like to call half-truths, on slickwater horizontal hydraulic fracturing. First, the DEQ, our regulators, our politicians, and the media keep saying, as printed in many newspapers, officials say fracking, a method of extracting natural gas from the ground, has been going on for 50 years. While this comment may be true, a method of fracking was developed over 50 years ago and has been used in many vertical wells throughout this state. The Michigan DEQ Oil and Gas Mineral Division like to call these wells the 60-12,000. 12,000 wells in the last 60 years of Michigan's history. Typically, in Michigan, these wells are drilled up to a depth of 1,000 to 2,000 feet in what is called the Antrim Shale. These shallow wells were mainly fracked using pure water, gel, and foam. Chemicals were not needed as they are today, and all 100% of these wells were drilled vertically. Not one of these wells in the last 60 years were horizontally drilled wells. Their environmental success was mainly due to the Environmental Protection Agency's regulations and state laws protection that required the gas and oil companies to follow the same rules as all other industries or citizens with respect to our EPA's Safe Water Drinking Acts, Clean Water Acts, Clean Air Acts, Superfund Acts, and with the absolute disclosure of all chemicals being injected underground. This type of drilling and these type of wells are what are called conventional drilled wells. Unlike their humble origins, unconventional or modern fracking operations today destroy millions of gallons of fresh water pumped into bedrock and shale plays at pressures as high as 15,000 psi to break open shale and tight sandstone formations. This is over 20 times the pressure, 800 times the water destruction volume of the first fracking operations. Modern fracking has as much in common with early fracking as an SR-71 Blackbird spy plane has in common with the Wright brothers' first flyer. Thank you. Yet our state regulators, our politicians, and many advocates of modern fracking like to cite those decades of old-fashioned fracking as proof that modern fracking is also safe. Okay? However, what they're not mentioning is the massive modern fracking operations now being used today in many states and most recently in Michigan are significantly different and extremely more invasive. It's not the same. These are what are called unconventional drilled wells, or what I refer to as modern fracking. This type of fracking and drilling really took off or got started in 2005 after becoming exempt from the EPA's basic regulations and key aspects of the Safe Water, Clean Air, and the Superfund Acts, and many other liability and damage cleanup responsibilities. This has been known as the Halliburton loophole, which was created when former Vice President Dick Cheney, also CEO of Halliburton Corporation, introduced an amendment to the 2005 Energy Bill. Essentially, it has stripped the Environmental Protection Agency's authority to regulate modern or slick water hydraulic fracturing. These basic regulations were put into place to protect the people and our environment. There is not another industry in this state that is exempt or does not have to abide by these simple, basic federal regulations. It is also important to know that these companies are not required to disclose the contents of their chemicals used in this fracking process. And this poses a huge problem for individual townships and communities throughout the state that may have emergency response teams and they don't know what type of toxic chemical they're about to deal with or how. Today, the oil and gas companies essentially have a free range to drill where and how they choose with very little responsibility for their environmental damage. As a result of the EPA's lack of ability to enforce, regulations have been left to the individual states. As a result of these exemptions, every state that has allowed this kind of modern fracking to begin has suffered water loss, water contamination, air quality problems, and many surface water contamination blunders. Such states as Colorado, Pennsylvania, Wyoming, New York, Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Ohio are just some of the many states that have had documented issues. Yes, that's okay. Yes, documented issues. Which brings me to another misleading comment. Somewhere you're going to hear someone say there is absolutely no documented issues of hydraulic fracturing as being the direct cause of any groundwater contamination. What is so misleading about this comment is that when we, as citizens, refer to the impacts of fracking, we include the impacts resulting from all of the activities needed to bring this shale gas or oil well into production using modern fracking, which includes the degrading of our roads and bridges, many broad changes to the environment, health, and community conditions, initial water contamination of millions of gallons of fresh groundwater, chemical storage, chemical spills, wastewater and produced water spills, wastewater treatment plants, and the over-injection and under-regulation of our injection wells. Blowout, human error, faulty or cracked cement casings, allowing methane seepage and migration into upper water-bearing aquifers, injection wells causing hundreds of life-threatening earthquakes, and the possibility of breaching and compromising the protective integrity of the thousands of cement-grouted oil and gas wells that may be in the area. We as citizens consider the word fracking the entire process from beginning to end. Our DEQs, our state representatives, our politicians, and all of the oil and gas industry's narrow-minded definition of hydraulic fracturing is an operation involving pumping fluid and proppants into a target formation to create or propagate artificial fractures or enhance natural fractures for the purpose of improving the deliverability and production of hydrocarbons. To them, the actual act of fracking does not cause the actual methane contamination of the groundwater or the environmental damages that have been documented throughout this country. Now recently, even their version of fracking has been connected with problems in its process, which is the uncontrollable distance for which these fractures travel. And more importantly, the uncontrollable intersection with natural fractures, crevices, and the many fault lines within our state. Such as in Mahoney County, the site of Ohio's latest string of earthquakes, where Ohio geologists and Department of Natural Resources have found a probable connection between the actual act of fracking and several earthquakes in the region that have never been experienced before. Ohio's DNR geologists believe that sand, water, and the chemical cocktail injected into well during the hydraulic fracturing process may have increased pressure on an unknown micro fault line in the area. Michigan's unique geological makeup does not support chemical injection or the use of modern, slick-water, horizontal hydraulic fracturing. Normally considered confining layers, Michigan has uniquely fractured shale sandstones and limestones that are fractured and depressed like a bowl shape from glaciers millions of years ago. Michigan's geological makeup cannot contain the projected millions and millions of gallons of injected chemicals and sometimes radioactive waste without eventual and definite migrating to the surface, our Great Lakes, and our underground water supplies. Also, our Great Lakes and our underground water supplies, also with two major fault lines and the possibility of hundreds of unknown fault lines running through Michigan, we run the risk of any small earthquake, as has been experienced in Ohio, to prove catastrophic in Michigan, creating conduits that will release the gases, speed the migrating of chemicals to our surface and groundwaters. In Arkansas, this type of disposal has resulted in over 800 earthquakes from September 2010 to January 2011, when the use of those injection wells were temporarily banned. All of these gas, oil, and injection wells have been cement grouted to protect us from contamination by the way of migration of methane or chemicals being injected from getting into our aquifers. What does cement do when moved or jostled around? It cracks. And I can safely say that so far there is no earthquake-proof cement. Something I would like to make perfectly clear. When an oil or gas well is being drilled and it becomes time to employ the actual technique of fracking or the stimulation of the shale play, and by the DEQ or regulator's definition, pumping millions of gallons of toxic cocktail and proppants into a target formation. At this point, this well is actually an injection well until it is into production weeks later. That is why we're also finding connections between the fracking wells and earthquakes. And with epicenters located in the direct vicinity of these wells and many other wells, who is to know, inspect, or document the actual integrity of these cement bonds? Excuse me. Which brings me to another issue that I like to comment on. When the gas and oil companies approach your door for a lease agreement, not one time will they mention, or even when asked, admit that their intention is for fracking. And they're not lying. But what they don't mention is that the drilling company that they're representing only does the drilling, setting of the casing, and the cementing of the casing. They tear the rig down and they move on. The next step is the extraction crew, a LLC spin-off company, sometimes of the same drilling company. The extraction crew is something that no one hears about. This is the crew that does the actual slick water horizontal hydraulic fracturing to extract the natural gas. The extraction process that takes place is where the contamination and the environmental damage comes in. This is where the use of the undisclosed chemicals are used. This is where large volumes of fresh water is rapidly removed and destroyed from surface waters and our aquifers. It is then chemically altered to be what I call slick water or frictionless, with a cocktail of chemicals similar to the makeup of diesel fuel that will assure this fluid can never be H2O again, and as it is removed from our aquifers and from our Earth's hydraulic cycle forever. What they also don't tell you is that their intent is for natural gas. And natural gas exists in an extremely tight shale play in Michigan called the Utica County Wood Shale Play that proves non-beneficial to drilling and extracting the conventional way, only the unconventional way. Industry and regulators like to say hydraulic fracturing uses 5,000 to 8,000 gallons of fresh water for each fracturing event, somewhat comparable to the amount of water spread over a 1-acre farm of corn or some kind of frivolous comparison like that. What I would like to say and point out to you and make very clear is that when you use millions of gallons of our aquifer for farming, municipalities, heat treating plants, even bottled water companies, this water never leaves our hydraulic cycle. The same water has been reused for thousands of years. The difference in modern fracking is this process does not use the water, it destroys it. I should also remind you that all of these industries and every other industry in Michigan follow all of the Michigan's water withdrawal rules, such as Michigan's Preservation Act, the Great Lakes Compacts Act, and our own state's water withdrawal assessment tool. The gas and oil companies are 100% exempt from these rules in Michigan. Now, the second half of this misleading comment is that hydraulic fracturing only destroys 5 to 8 million gallons per fracking event. This may be true in other states with extremely shallower wells, but in Michigan, our shale play lies 2 to 3 times deeper. Let me give you an example of quantities destroyed through records obtained through the Freedom of Information Act on just one of the slick water horizontal fractured wells that have been drilled in Michigan. The drilling company Ecan reported that the Excelsior 325, a northern Michigan drilled well, with a depth reaching almost 2 miles and over a 2-mile horizontal long drill, withdrew and destroyed over a whopping 21 million gallons of life-sustaining fresh groundwater, making it the national record for the largest amount of water ever destroyed or withdrawn for a single slick water horizontal hydraulically fractured well ever. Combined with 2 other horizontal wells on that same pad, records show that more than 42 million gallons of water was destroyed and permanently removed from the Earth's hydraulic cycle. The company's application adds that this well pad is sized to accommodate up to 6 or 8 horizontal drilled wells. If there are 8 horizontal drilled wells on this pad, a total water destruction will be more than 100 million gallons of our fresh water permanently removed from the Earth's hydraulic cycle. This pad is in the Ross Common State Forest, just south of Houghton Lake. Another way to look at this amount of water withdrawal, it would take only 6 of these wells, well pads, to surpass the entire 60 years of Antrim fracked wells in Michigan and all 12,000 gas and oil wells previously drilled in Michigan. That's how different these wells are today. This is not an exception. In Michigan, this is the norm. Which brings me to the next point. What do we do with all this wastewater? Michigan's regulators and oil and gas industry's answer is deep well injection wells. Out of sight, out of mind. While this vector of the fracking process is usually an afterthought, this portion of the fracking process also carries the highest potential of both large and grand-scale contamination risk. The projected amount of chemically altered and many times radioactive toxic wastewater produced is absolutely staggering. The knockout is that Michigan's and Ohio's DEQ and regulators everywhere recognize this extremely toxic and sometimes radioactive and extremely different deep shale waste as the same salty, watery brine that was produced from our Antrim Shale and shallower shale plays, allowing this chemically altered toxic waste to be underclassified and injected into our extremely less restrictive and underregulated Type 2 shallower injection wells, which will eventually contaminate Michigan's unique commodity of natural brine under Michigan that has the potential of saving many townships and our state millions of dollars. The primary risk to the Great Lakes Basin posed by flowback and toxic waste thus stems from disposal wells. Michigan currently has more than 1,000 injection disposal wells. Of the 214 wells within Ohio, 35 of them are located and inject within the Michigan's Great Lakes Basin. The potential scale of the injection is of a major concern as the shale development increases in and around the Great Lakes Basin. Disposal wells receive the burden of more flowback in our already over-injected and unregulated and under-monitored injection wells. New York and Pennsylvania have very few disposal wells. New York has only 3 disposal wells that accept this kind of exploration water. Pennsylvania only has 5 wells that currently accept such wastewater. As the option to treat flowback wastewater and produce wastewater has become more limited, and the volume of wastewater has increased dramatically, Pennsylvania operators have increasingly looked to disposal outside of their state. Ohio is the recipient of Pennsylvania and West Virginia's fracking industry's toxic wastewater, in addition to its own overwhelmed injection wells. Michigan will, with more than 1,000 injection wells, will also, like Ohio, quickly become a toxic dumping ground, taking in fracking waste from many other locations. Which also leads to other less attractive ways of getting rid of this wastewater, as experienced in Mahoney County, Ohio, when a hose was ran from a 20,000-gallon storage tanker to a nearby storm drain, sending thousands of gallons of toxic fracking wastewater containing benzene, toluene, and other hazardous pollutants into the Mahoney River. Not once, but admittedly over 24 times before being turned in by area residents. Or the thousands of pounds of industrial-sized sediment socks containing radioactive sludge and residue currently being found on the roadsides, unsuspecting business dumpsters, abandoned houses, and abandoned storage trucks in North Dakota. Or, as has been seen in Kalkaska, Michigan, when 40,000 gallons of this wastewater, considered brine, was from the Excelsior well and sprayed on the dirt roads as the dust control for the year, pointing out a severe lack of regulation, oversight demonstrated by our DEQ, while also demonstrating the oil and gas companies' willful and deceptive ways. This and many other atrocities have been brought to the forefront, not by our regulators, but it is a direct result of public awareness, involvement, and sufferings discovered by our local area citizens. While regulators and regulations are playing catch-up to this new technology. While I was attending the Midwestern Groundwater Issue Conference, one of the key pieces of information that had been stressed at that conference was the need and the importance of baseline testing before gas and oil exploration begins. The National Groundwater Association recommends and has compiled a list of constituents to test for in areas of oil and gas development. It includes the major ions in groundwater and are used to define a water type similar to labeling blood types. Analyzing this soup of ions pre and post drilling allows for quantitative changes in water quality to be determined. This is yet to be done in Michigan, or in many other states, while our state and private lands have already been leased and drilling has begun. By not doing this, successfully sets up as been used in every other state that the argument that the contamination was already there. We depend on our voted politicians, our hired representatives, the DEQ, the DNR, and our water resource commissions to protect our citizens, environment, and the better interest of the people. I believe it is time to hold our voted public officials responsible for the short-term decisions on long-term issues that will affect our communities, public health, environment, and freshwater supplies for many years from now. Also, our citizens need to be more proactive to force the hand of our public officials and our regulators and let them know that our environmental laws were not made for manipulation and are not for sale. Instead of permitting taking the driver's seat and regulating taking the back seat, we need strict and effective safeguards by way of comprehensive regulations, proactive oversight, and a strict enforcement process. Many municipalities around this state and country have already banned fracking to protect their citizens from the consequences suffered from this type of drilling. They have put their citizens, their environment, and freshwater supplies in front of the almighty dollar and have banned this type of slickwater, horizontal, hydraulic fracturing in their communities. I believe rushing into this type of drilling procedure that has proven atrocities and possibilities of contamination on a grand scale is irresponsible. The oil and gas-rich shales beneath Michigan have been there for millions of years and is not going anywhere soon. So let's err on the side of caution. Take time to develop ways to extract the gas and oil in a less invasive and more responsible manner, and it will then maybe prove beneficial. Vermont is the first state to ban fracking, the storage of the chemicals used, and the disposal of millions of gallons of wastewater into their injection wells within their borders. Also recently, Connecticut has also introduced a bill to their legislation that will also prevent the use, storage, and disposal of wastewater within their borders. My question to our regulators is, what does Vermont and Connecticut know that Michigan does not know? What does Vermont and Connecticut have that Michigan does not have? Maybe they realize that they have a limited groundwater supply. As Aldo Leopold once said, and I quote, "Our community cannot impose a groundwater ethic, but at least we can explain what is at stake," unquote. And ladies and gentlemen, this is what's at stake. Michigan has the longest freshwater coastline of any political subdivision in the world. Being bound by 4 of the 5 Great Lakes plus Lake St. Clair, it has over 64,000 inland lakes and ponds where a person in this state is never more than 6 miles from a natural water source or more than 85 miles from a Great Lakes shoreline. Michigan also holds 20% of the world's available fresh surface water. Or the fact that over 2.9 million residents are served by privately owned individual wells. Or the fact that there are over 1,100 Michigan community water systems that use groundwater for over 1.6 million Michigan residents. Definitely making Michigan a state with something at stake. Our underground water veins are made up of 95% unconfined aquifers, which means our underground aquifers, our surface waters, our Great Lakes are connected. Which means water contamination in Saginaw affects groundwater quality in Flint. Groundwater quality in Genesee County affects groundwater quality in Lapeer County. Eventually, water contamination in Lake Erie also contaminates water in Lake Huron, which also contaminates Lake Superior, and so on. I would hope that our state and local community leaders would act responsible to protect our groundwater, our environment, and the communities we live in from the atrocities experienced in the other cities, towns, and states. If Michigan wants to remain pure Michigan, or a vacation destination, and enjoy revenue from this for many years to come, our citizens are going to have to band together and demand that our representatives support a statewide ban on slickwater, horizontal, hydraulic fracturing. On the fracturing, their chemicals and the injection of their waste within our borders. Now, if you've noticed, I've said nothing to the fact of the economics of gas and oil, or the revenue, or the income, or the jobs created, because to me, it's a no-brainer. I'd like to share with you a poem that was published in the Michigan Groundwater Association Convention booklet some 45 years ago. It was from one water well driller to another. And I should also say that I find this poem ironic that I, as a water well driller, that has provided safe drinking water for not only this state, but this community for many years, and I am now standing here today convincing you of the value of it. This poem's titled More Valuable Than Oil. Did you ever stop to ponder when sitting all alone, when there's no one at the office door or calling on the phone, why is it that the Gettys or the Ewings of TV have fancy cars, homes, and land so strange to you and me? It's because they drill for black gold, that slippery, greasy crude that makes them rich and famous and sometimes slightly rude. But when you think of all of this and your blood begins to boil, just remember, someday your water will be more valuable than oil. Yes, most would say it's oil and gas that makes this country go. But if they stop to think a bit, they would know it's just not so. Let them use it once to wash their face or take a healthy drink, or run in their bathtub, or better yet, their kitchen sink. See, it's really water that we need to keep us going strong. For without this priceless resource, we cannot get along. So the next time you spud some casing in or rotor in that soil, just remember, someday water will be more valuable than oil. It may not be tomorrow, but the groundwork is clearly laid for all to know the value of our important trade. So if you get discouraged over long, hard hours that you toil, just remember, someday, clean, clear water will be more valuable than oil. And ladies and gentlemen, that someday is today. No matter what monetary value you put on it, sales, royalties, jobs, today your water is more valuable than oil. Just before I step down here and stuff, and I thank you for that, guys, I got a couple of websites that I'd like you to look at too. So if you have a pencil and paper, you can maybe jot a couple of these down. One of them is, everybody says, oh, there's no, documented issues of contamination and people being harmed and all that stuff. Let me give you a website to go to, and it's called, and I'm not real savvy with this, but I just Google it up, and I Google Pennsylvania Alliance for Clean Water and Air. And it's a list of harm. That list is like 5,000 people right now that have their cases, their court case, their newspaper clippings, their complaints, their doctor's stuff, the conclusion of it all, the end of it all, and there's 5,000 different ones from every state that has allowed this. There's even some in Michigan here that have their stories here. But that's a very good website to go to find and see the atrocities that's happened in all these other states. Another good one to Google is one that's called Fracking by the Numbers. It's a 2013 report. It's from Environmental America. And it's a 47-page report that discusses the key aspects of dirty drilling at the state and national level. It's a very good website to go into. You'll learn a lot of information there. Of course, Food and Water Watch, Ann had mentioned that for us, very good hub for information for us. And of course, I'd also like to mention the Committee to Ban Fracking. They're out there working very hard for us to gather signatures. I'm not sure if they're here for us here today.
Yes, we are.
Awesome. Stop and see these guys, sign their petitions. Remember, it's the Committee to Ban Fracking, and they also have their website, which I hope I don't get this wrong, www.letsbanfracking.org.
Yes.
Thank you. Of course, they need donations. And an important thing to remember about this, when you're out gathering signatures like that, these people aren't professional gatherers, and we need professional people out there to actually gather these signatures. And that's what a lot of the donation money for is, to pay people to get out there and get these 300,000 or 3 million or whatever the number is of signatures. So a donation is a very good thing. If you can't do something on your own, donate a few bucks to them. And it goes to a good cause. It's helping us. Or you can volunteer your time. I know they have a site there. You can volunteer your time and help them be a signature gatherer or something like that. Another one I'd like to throw out here at you. You know, everybody's got their cell phones, right? I get a lot of my information by what's called Google Alert. And what I do is you have to look into this, and you put in a couple keywords. I put in Fracking, Michigan. I'll get information, any blog, any newspaper clipping, things that go online, anything that happens that has anything to do with fracking in Michigan comes to my website. I do it for Ohio, I do it on North Dakota, I do it on these states that have this stuff going on, because you cannot imagine what's going on in North Dakota and Ohio, and that information doesn't get here to us. And we're not really full bore into it right now. It's in its infant stages. We need to learn what's going on. We need our newspapers and reporters and people to bring that information to us so that we can make informed decisions on what's going on here, whether you want this or not. Just a couple things I'll touch on. I mentioned North Dakota. A couple things about North Dakota. First of all, you've seen that picture with all those flares going and all that stuff. That's a huge problem. People are really screaming about that out there because their intention out there isn't the natural gas, it's oil. So they're drilling down and they're bypassing this gas that's coming out, and they have to get rid of it somehow. So they're flaring it off. That's millions and millions of dollars of their product. And that's what's lighting up the sky. Just burning that gas off. Does that make sense? The point here is that their infrastructure, this has happened so fast out there in North Dakota, they don't even have the pipelines and the infrastructure to capture that gas and send it off and keep it. They're trying to catch up to that now. The other thing that's going on out there too is that you hear our farmers and all that are competing for water with this in our Midwestern arid states out there. They're competing for water with this oil and gas industry, driving the cost up for our farmers. The other problem these farmers have is that in North Dakota, they tout about producing a million barrels of this oil a day, which is very impressive. They're second to Texas. That's very impressive. Problem here is, though, not only are they being destroyed out there from different things happening, but they have no way to get rid of this oil. Once they're producing this oil, how do they get it out there? I'll tell you how they're doing it. They're doing it by rail, and they're doing it by pipeline. These pipelines are way already so injected, you can only get so much to go through there. Problem here is the railways. They're flooding the railways with so much oil going in and out of North Dakota there that the farmers can't get their seeds or their fertilizers. Thank you. They can't get their fertilizers this year in there because there's so much gas and oil on these rails. They're skyrocketing their prices. They're almost thinking of not even doing it this year. The other problem is last year's product are still sitting in their silos. They can't get them out right now and it's rotting. So it's a huge problem with the infrastructure that hasn't caught up. You see? One other thing on North Dakota out there, they're also finding that they tout about this $2 billion overfund that they have. They didn't know how to get this money out of here in the first place, and it's just overflowing with all kinds of this gas and oil money. Of course, there's a lot of money involved in that. But on the other hand, then they're finding these radiated socks, which is waste socks, like what you would find on your washing machine that strains out all the lint and all that stuff, right? Well, these are industrial-sized socks that are radiated and leaking with major radiation and contaminations. They have no place to put these socks. North Dakota has no place and no dump to accept radioactive material. So they're finding these in unsuspected dumpsters and all that stuff, like I explained, everywhere. That the infrastructure is way behind. So that's something to think about there. As far as Ohio goes, they have correlated the earthquakes with the fracking of the wells and the disposal wells. Once that gets out, and it gets into our newspapers and all that, you can bet already, I believe it's like 26 to 27% loss of your house and home value just being around a fracking well site. Within a mile, you're losing value on your home. Once this hits, you're around a injection well or a fracking well in your area, you probably won't be able to sell your house. You are definitely going to lose. People are wising up to that. I think that's about all I got here for you. And other than that, I can answer questions when it's time.
We're switching the schedule slightly, and I just want to mention that Luann Cosma is here from Food and Water Watch. She will be speaking briefly right at the end before the question and answer session. I'd like to invite the sheriff to the stage. Ron Calquin's great-grandfather was a farmer in Tuscola County. His grandfather bought the land that he lives on now, and Ron will speak about his legacy and his connection to the land. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Peter. You know, when we have a jury trial, the jurors can only absorb as much information and facts as the butt can absorb. Let's all stand up. Let's move our feet a little bit. Let's do a little bit of a shuffle. Okay, we're running to the finish line here. Let's turn around and say hello to your neighbor and say where you're from, what your name is, and why you're here.
How you doing? Good. My name is Lloyd. Yeah. I think there's some around there. Yeah.
All right, jurors, take your seats. We will go on with the trial to see if we can find Fracking guilty and sentence him to life imprisonment. Hey, thank you so much for coming. It's an honor to be here. My story is rather simple. It's not too fact-laden. But, you know, as Peter mentioned, you know, I live at my grandfather's farm. I hope to pass it on to my grandchildren. And, of course, right now we've got clean air, clean water, the skies are blue, the trees are healthy. It's a perfect environment to live, to raise children, and to work. And you know, the farmers I've met, they love the land. It provides them sustenance. It grows their crops. It feeds their animals. It ensures a well-being for themselves and their families. So I think that the farm aspect that I'm coming from is somewhat a different slant on all the different information. So if you agree with me that, you know, that land is sacred, whether it's a small lot or a bigger acreage, it's sacred to our heart and our soul, because we cannot survive. You know, we might want to pay $4 or $5 for a gallon of gas, but how much are we going to pay for a gallon of pure water? 8, 9, 10 times that. You know, my job as sheriff is sort of to protect the people, and sometimes I got to sort of look out the horizon and see the dangers that are out there. It's sort of like that good shepherd in the Bible, you know, sort of going ahead of the sheep there and say, hey, there's a poisonous plant here, there's a pothole here, there's muck over there, don't walk into it. And that's sort of my job, is to sort of look out and look for those pitfalls, look for those dangers, look how I could be harmed, my neighbors could be harmed, my children can be harmed. So, you know, just to give you a brief history, when we were having the abductions in Oakland County and the kids were being killed, I started, you know, something called child fingerprinting, safety bill, you know, things like that. When heroin was coming into Lapeer, I started something called DARE for the kids and put a deputy on the state drug team. So it's sort of my job to sort of look for things, because, you know, once we have a crime and arrest somebody and go to trial, it's very, very expensive. In my opinion, it's much better to cut the issue off at its source. As far as fracking, we need to cut off the source of the land lease. We need to cut off those people that are being hoodwinked, like the young man that came to my house on a Sunday afternoon at 3 o'clock when I was working in my pole building on my antique motorcycles and wanted to talk to me. I said, well, you know, this is probably some guy, divorce situation, his wife won't give him the kids. I have people come to my house all the time. My number's in the phone book. So I turned around and I walked back to my pole building and he said, do you live here? He said, no, I live over there. So he wanted to go in there and talk, and my wife was a little bit shocked on a Sunday afternoon. And she said to him, well, get his card. And he says, well, I'm right here right now, I want to talk. So over the years, 30 years in law enforcement, I sort of adopted the Colombo style of police investigation, if you can get that. Sort of act dumb, which is easy for me, and ask a lot of questions. So he came in and he was, telling us all about the advantages of signing this gas oil lease and so forth, so on. And as I flipped through the lease agreement, I didn't tell him I was a lawyer. I'm sort of a puppy lawyer. I became a lawyer to defend myself from lawyers, except Linda Berker. Okay. So as I was looking through there, he had my complete land description. He had my wife's name, my name, so forth, so on. And I asked him, I said, are you going to be fracking here? He said, oh yes, but it's completely safe. Like this man just said a minute ago, been fracking for 50 years, never a problem. Well, as I talked to him and gathered more information, he showed me a map. He said, Ron, look, these are all the people that have signed around you. All your neighbors have signed. And in fact, the other ones, they're seriously considering it. The bandwagon effect, get on right now, sign sort of that high pressure, sort of polite salesmanship that he was so good at. But after he left, I went on the computer and was looking at the Michigan State Extension Office program. Let me read something here from Michigan law. A person who enters into a gas lease after March of 2000 shall not deduct from the landowner's royalty any portion of the post-production cost unless the lease explicitly provides for the deduction of post-production costs. This is what really got me ticked off besides the fracking. In this lease, do they give you what Michigan law guarantees you? No. Do they give you that? No. No, because you unwittingly, just like a scam with seniors or internet fraud or winning the lottery, it's the same kind of scam. They don't tell you your rights. Now, I'm just one person, but we have the power of one here today, right? We've got about 250 people. The reason I'm here is to ask you to talk to your neighbors who might be considering this or might have already signed and say, hey, you're getting screwed. You know that? I think if we can stop the gas oil lease signers, there'll be less damage to our environment. That's my complete message. This is a scam. This is a ripoff. If we can cut off, like with heroin or burglaries, the predators, and we can be educated citizens, then we can curtail this. The second thing is, I'm in politics, and I tell you, politics has become so corrupt. So corrupt. Because, as the fellow was talking about, 1972, Nixon passed the Clean Air Water Act. Now, I think it was 2005 he mentioned, you got the Halliburton exception. Most certainly we have got the best government that money can buy. And it's really up to us to sort of, when we see these guys that are running for State House or Congress this year, to go up to them and say, hey, I'm going to vote on one issue. Where are you at on fracking? Where are you at on fracking? And unless we do that as a unified voice, a strong voice, they're going to be taking that money under the table. The United States Supreme Court has passed 2 decisions here recently that open the floodgates to corporate money. There is no curtailment at all. Money comes to politicians, and you don't even know where the money comes from. So there's only the power of one, right? You've got to be proactive. You have to educate your neighbors. Okay? Thank you for your time. Please try to spread this message to your friends who might have been considering this or might have already taken it in. Maybe Linda Berker will talk about, if you've already signed, sometimes contracts can be nullified if there's fraud. Maybe Linda can talk about that as she follows me in a few minutes. Thank you so much.
Where do you stand if they want to take the land? Sheriff? Excuse me? where do you stand when they want to come and take the land?
Things like that?
Exactly. BLM, whoever, the federal government decides to show up, you got enough oil there.
All that has to be legal, that can't be corruption, as I talked about.
Okay, so we can continue that conversation in the conversation room. Thank you. Because I know a lot of us are fired up, so if you get so fired up that you want to talk, that's why we have that space out in the gallery, and we really encourage that, so stay fired up. Thank you. This next man is also very fired up because he did this thing called Build Your Dream Home, and we called this program Not in Your Backyard. Well, it happened in Gary's backyard.
My name is Gary Cooley. I live in North Branch, but I built this place in Grayling in 1996. And first of all, I want to recognize my wife because she helped build it. Would you stand up, Sharon? We built the house in 1996, and after we retired, we were going to build and make a bed and breakfast out of the existing building. And then we were going to build our dream home on the rest of the property. In 2012, Encana Gas Company and DTE Pipeline changed our dream home into a nightmare. Let me show you how that happened. The house is located about 4 miles north of Higgins Lake State Park, close to Houghton Lake, Higgins Lake, Lake Marguerite, and Camp Grayling. We're surrounded by over 2,000 acres of state land. It's just a beautiful area if you've ever been up there. It's close to, I mean, you've got hunting, camping, skiing, and hiking. It's just a great place to be. The start of the gas well. In August of 2012, we saw a surveyor on King Road. He wouldn't divulge any information about what he was doing. Later we found out he was surveying for the DTE gas line. In October of 2012, we saw and heard the sounds of Encana clearing the forest for the gas well. This gas well went on public land. It was our state land. The gas well was finished in February 2013, and because of Public Act 415, Part 615, we couldn't get any information about that well until May of 2013. There's a public act that states you can't get any information about the gas wells until that well is complete. That is Michigan law. And I says, how could this be? You know, this is America. We have rights. Boy, did I find out we didn't have any rights. In October 2012, I called every official about what was happening to our precious area. I called local township officials, state representatives, federal officials, and even contacted the EPA in Chicago. The answer from all of them was about the same. You have nothing to worry about the environment, and that the gas industry was going to provide thousands of good, well-paying jobs. Boy, were they ever wrong. This is a typical well site. This particular well site consisted of 7 acres. They come in and they level it. The ground is all level. And then what they do is they put an earth berm around the entire site. This is the Beaver Creek well. That's the well that's very close to my house. And those are the blow-off caps, and that is actually the wellhead right there. This is the well pad before fracking. And again, they cleared off the 7 acres, and they started the fracking process in May. I'll go another one. This right here is where my house is located. And this map was given to me by Encana Gas Company. This is the wellhead itself, and then around the wellhead, they drilled 6 water wells, and they used those water wells for fracking. This here is the well itself. What they do is they go 2 miles vertically and 2 miles horizontally. And on the horizontal leg, you can see it goes right by my house. And this here is where the pipeline went. And the pipeline is within 59 feet of my property line. The gas well notice. The residents in our area were not given any notice by the township officials, the state DNR, the DEQ, or the EPA that a gas well was going to be drilled in our area. No one signed a mineral lease to Encana Gas Company. The law states no notice has to be given unless the population of the area exceeds 70,000 people. So that means the DEQ or the DNR, they don't have to tell you if there's going to be a gas well in your backyard. This was actually the pictures from the fracking process. These trucks are all Halliburton trucks. These trucks were brought in from Pennsylvania. And if you look to the top right there, during the fracking process, this is the pollution, the air pollution and the water pollution coming off that fracking process. During this process, they have to have the water trucks come in. And I don't know if any of you have ever been around a fracking process, but the noise is unbelievable. People think that fracking only takes about an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, maybe a week. It usually takes anywhere from 2 weeks to 6 weeks. During this process on this well, it took 4 weeks. During that time, the noise was unbelievable. We're about a half a mile from that frac site, and during that time, you couldn't even hear anything. If any of you have ever worked in a shop and heard the noise from the pressers and the assembly line, it was 10 times worse than that. They have massive generators and pumps that pump that water down to create the fractures. But the noise was unbearable. And then at night, you had all the light pollution, and then you had the trucks. There was many as 500 water trucks that would go up and down the road day and night. And when they frack, they don't stop. It's a 24/7 operation, continuous. These are more of the pollution coming off the frack trucks. During the fracking process, one of the dangers is methane gas. If it migrates to the top, and if there's a spark, it can blow the whole site up. Now where we're at, we're in a jack pine forest. And if any of you have been up to that area, if that forest is ever ignited, it will just burn the whole place down. When we went there, I just wanted to get some information about fracking. Like I tell everybody else, a year and a half ago, I didn't know a damn thing about fracking. But as I gathered more information, I could see what it was doing to me personally. This guy here, when we approached him, he was actually smoking on the frac site. He was actually smoking. That was strictly forbidden.
Yeah.
He became so irritated with my wife and I, and the dog, that he came over and he tried to take my camera, and that's when he called me an extreme environmental terrorist. And now I wear that with a badge of honor. But imagine, You imagine they got all their safety rules and regulations, and he was actually smoking on that pad. Everybody's talked about the chemicals. These are a partial list of the chemicals that came off that well, and every time that I had to get information about that well, I had to fill out a Freedom of Information Act. When they talk about the Michigan DEQ being transparent, they are not transparent. You have to write them letters, you have to make phone calls to get this information. There's a lot of chemicals that went down that well, and everybody's talked about the Halliburton loophole. They don't have to tell you about all the chemicals that went down that well. I'm not a chemist, nor am I a gas expert, but one of the things I want to point out to you is there's something there called HCl acid. Whatever the hell that stuff is, they put down 94,000 gallons of that stuff. In addition to all the other things they put down that well. Some of those are carcinogens and some of them are radioactive tracers. When we talked about the disposal, I contacted the DEQ and I said, where's this water going? The water, the dirty water, we call it dirty water, they call it produced water. Only 25% of that water comes up. The rest of it stays down in the well. That water was taken to Johannesburg and Clare, Michigan, and put back down into the water supply system, into injection wells. So there was a state geologist up there by the name of Bill Dooley, and he was the guy responsible for the well. Nice guy. And every time I'd ask him about the well, I says, can you guarantee that my well will never be contaminated? The answer was no. The state DEQ cannot guarantee if you're next to a gas well or a pipeline that your water will not be contaminated. In January 2013, before they started fracking, Encana sent me this letter. They wanted to test my well water. To test that well water is $1,100. When I became politically active, what Encana would do, they actually have a group of people called Psych Ops. And when you see Gasland 2, you're going to see the people from the Psych Ops. And the people testify about Psych Ops. Because they classified me as an extreme environmental terrorist, they refused to test my well water. The problem with that is they can frack that well as many as 18 times by state law. So you can imagine $1,100 times 18, the expense that I would have to incur just to have my well tested. After the well was completed, they started the pipeline. This was my area before the pipeline was constructed. It's just a two-track area. The road here is a main road. It's plowed in the wintertime. But this road here is still a primary road. It's a two-track. And this is where the pipeline went down. This is the actual, can you go back, Pete? That is the pipeline construction. My property is to the right. This is where the pipeline came down. And keep in mind, this is all state forest. What they did was they cut a path 100 feet wide, and then once they logged the logs out, they removed the stumps, and this is where they were taking the stumps out. They started at 7 o'clock in the morning, and they didn't stop until 7 o'clock at night. And during that operation, they put these signs all over my property, logging operations ahead, and they spiked the trees. There's like 20 of them all over my property. It took them 4 days to get them off, but they weren't very apologetic about taking those signs off. During that time, the workers were not very cooperative. They liked to park their trucks right in front of my house or on my road just to piss me off. They'd block it. This here is a picture of when they completely blocked the front of my house and the road. I asked them really nice, I said, can you just go out there and move those trucks? And the logging foreman, he just got really upset about that, and he says, I ain't moving the trucks. So I had to eventually call the Crawford County Police Department to have them come out and move the trucks so I could get out. When I talked to them, I said, you know, what if I have to have a fire truck or an ambulance or something get down here? They didn't care. So the police finally came out and they moved it.
Good.
When they removed the stumps, this right here is on state land again, right down the road from me. And these are the stumps from those 200-year-old red pines. All these trees were just beautiful red pines. And this is what's left of them. And today, that stump pile is still there. This was a beautiful meadow where there used to be a lot of deer come in here. There were birds, the Kirtland warbler was there. A lot of turkeys came in there. Now there's nothing because you've got all this stuff right here. This here is, after they cleared the land, they brought the pipe in. This here is the actual pipeline. Now, I want you to pay close attention to when they lay these pipes. These pipes are 50 feet long, and they're welded at these seams right here. But you would think pipes would not be elastic. They are. Look at how it has to follow the contour of that land. And that actually, it's hard to tell in the picture, but that dip there is almost 50 feet. So that pipe's going down 50 feet and then coming back up. This here is a typical weld on the pipeline. What they do is they put them up on these risers and then they weld them together. I'm not a weld expert, but over time I do not know how these welds are going to hold up with all the stress, because they put that pipe down 4 feet into the ground, and then you have all that heaving from the frost. And typically when pipelines break, that's where they break. The gas industry, as you see on TV, they talk about support us because we provide thousands of good, well-paying jobs. These are the pipeline workers. This guy was from Colorado. He was laid off, so he came to Michigan to get work, hired by the major pipeline. These two guys here are from Utah, and these three gentlemen are from Texas. These are your thousands of good, well-paying jobs. They work, these guys, 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. And what they do is, they stayed at the Ramada Inn in Grayling, and what they do is they bunch them up to save on cost. So there might be like 4 or 5 guys to one room. And I don't know what that guy's drinking at 10 o'clock in the morning, but what do you guys think it is? A lot of people talk about the natural gas. Where does this natural gas go? 40% of the natural gas that we produce in this state will go overseas. 40%. All of you last winter remembered the price hikes of propane and natural gas? In our area, propane went up to over $6 a gallon. And the reason for that is they're shipping it overseas so they can create false shortages here at home so they can raise the price. There's a lot of natural gas that we sit on, but they're shipping it overseas. Everybody knows about the Keystone XL pipeline. This is part of the leg of the pipeline in Texas. That is actually the pipeline. Now that pipeline will be above ground. And in that particular leg of the pipeline, it's already leaking and they're already having to dig it up. And that's less than a year old. And we have a lot of pipeline breaks in Michigan. Since the year 2000, we've had over 130 breaks. 2 years ago, everybody remembers the Enbridge break in Kalamazoo. That dumped thousands of gallons of crude oil into that river, and it's still not cleaned up. And you're going to see tonight the BP spill that happened in Louisiana. And it's just coincidentally, when I watched CNN today, that spill has still not been cleaned up, and there's still a lot of fish and animals that have not come back because of that spill. So that's one of the dangers of pipelines. And we do have pipelines here in Lapeer County. If people are familiar with the North Branch area, at the corner of Silverwood and Barnes is the Enbridge compression valve station. That pumps the oil down into Port Huron. And then we have a lot of pipelines all the way from the Upper Peninsula to the Lower Peninsula. And as a matter of fact, one of the pipelines goes under the Straits of Mackinac. And that's one of the concerns right now. This is my infamous flare. This is the Encana gas flare. It happened on July 25th, 2013. What had happened was the gas in that well was so intense, they couldn't hold it. So what they did was the workers, because the pipeline was not established, they didn't have no way to route it, it was going to blow the well up. So what they did was they ignited it themselves. That's a violation of DEQ regulations, but to this day, the DEQ never gave them a slap on the hand or a violation for that. But imagine if that flare would have got away. It would have burnt that whole area down. And if anybody is here, remember the fire of 1989, when we had the fire from Lovells to Grayling. It burned thousands of acres because, again, these are all jack pine forest. How does gas wells and pipelines affect property values? Linda's going to talk a little bit about that, but from my own experience, we kind of got fed up with the oil and gas industry up there, so we've been trying to sell our place for the last 2 years. Food and Water Watch wrote this letter for me. Some of your people from Food and Water Watch, Tia Liberts wrote this letter for me. They estimate that your property values will go down about 26.6%. In my case, it will be 0. Nobody wants to buy my place up there, and I'll show you why. When you go to sell your property, you have what they call a seller disclosure statement. There's been 5 people that have been very interested in buying my place up there, or I should say our place. And one of the things you have to do to prospective buyers is you have to disclose any type of environmental issue. Do you have any underground storage tanks? Do you live next to a gas well? Are you close to a pipeline? When I disclosed all that information, every single one of them walked away because they had seen the movies Gasland, Gasland 2, Promised Land, and they don't want that headache. So a lot of people that are contemplating putting a gas well on their leased land, this is one of the things that they should look at. Again, those are, when you try to get a mortgage with a house located to a gas well or pipeline, you're not going to get a mortgage. FHA ruling says if that gas well or pipeline is within 300 feet of them, they're not going to give you a mortgage. This was a little cartoon I put together because we always talk about the DEQ being transparent. When I went to a lot of these meetings, the people from the DEQ said they were always transparent. They're about as transparent as mud. They don't always give you the straight answer. If I had to make up a new real estate sign, it would say, it's a lovely chalet with my own gas flare, my own gas pipeline, and my own gas well. It's a fire sale. Anybody want to buy it? Oh, there's a lady back there that wants to buy it. If anybody's interested in buying this place, see me after the movie and I'll give you a deal. Everybody talks about Western Land Services. I met this gentleman and I had to find out more information about what they were doing. Here in Lapeer County, they offer everybody $25 for an acre of land. And what they don't realize, that runs concurrent, so $25 is actually $250 a year. This is Western Land Services located in Ludington, Michigan. And Western offered the people here $25, the people in Sand Lake $30, and the people in Pennsylvania $2,000 to $2,500 an acre. Look at the big difference. I want to thank you for your time. I hope and pray you never have to live next to a gas well or a pipeline and have your dreams turned into nightmares. I encourage you to watch the movies Gasland, Gasland 2, and Promised Land. Become educated about the oil and gas industry. Search out websites like foodandwaterwatch.org, article32.org, and idlenomore.org. Remember, you and a collective voice can change government. And I just want to tell you one of the things that happened today. Some of you might be aware of it, but the Indians have been very concerned about the XL pipeline, especially with it going through Nebraska. And for the past week, they've been meeting on the Washington Mall to try and educate the public about some of their concerns. And today was supposed to be the March on Washington. And if you get a chance, please take a look at it tonight. Thank you for your time.
Linda Berker's up next. She is using the law to watch our back, and we love her for it. Rabble rouser, Linda Berker.
I'm affiliated with the Sierra Club Nepicing Group, but I'm speaking today as a local attorney. Just going to try to move it along really quickly here once Pete gets my PowerPoint up, and give you my legal view on personal property damage and personal injury. So you've heard from all the speakers here today about the dangers of fracking in natural gas and oil extraction. They cause pollution, dust, noise, nuisance, and can result in a diminution or lowering of a property's values. So now we'll be on slide number 3 once you get that up, Pete. So the background problem here is that a lowering of property value is not compensable absent a showing of actual harm, actual personal injury, or actual property damage. So the point being, I've represented people. They come to me, they say, hey, you know, that there's a well, a contaminated well next door, and my property values are going to be lower. Or
there's a forced disposal site over here, and I didn't know about that. Now I can't sell my home. What can I do? And I say, well, in order to maintain a legal action against a drilling company or anybody else, including your neighbor upon whose lands the drilling is occurring, you have to bear the cost yourself of proving actual personal injury or actual property damage. So what do we have to do to prove property or personal injury? And I'd like that slide to be up.
I'm so sorry, I'm not sure.
Okay, well, let's skip the slides then. So in order to prove actual personal injury, you have to prove physical injury to your body. The fact that you haven't been able to sleep for 4 weeks is not compensable unless you can prove physical harm to your body through the use of expert medical testimony that proves that your body contains some of the fracking chemicals and that you've therefore been harmed and that you weren't exposed to these chemicals in any other way. So that's really difficult to do. You kind of have to find a doctor that's a specialist in what they call occupational medicine to have him test your blood, test your bone marrow, prove that you've been exposed, and prove that whatever illness you're suffering, whether it's cancer, a brain tumor, whatever illness you have, asthma, is actually caused by the fracking company's chemicals and not from something else. And one of the problems here is that doctors are really hesitant to testify that any particular chemical exposure caused a particular illness. You know, they say, well, you have cancer and it could have been environmentally caused, but for them to say that it was this particular exposure at this particular time is really difficult for them, and real difficult for you to find that. So that's slide number 1. Can we go to slide number 4? Keep going, Pete. There's the lowering of property value, proof of personal injury. There we are. Doctors are very hesitant to testify. So even if your water is contaminated, you must bear the burden of proving trespass in order to be compensated for the contamination. So we know it's difficult to prove personal injury. Now we're on trespass. How would you prove trespass? Let's go to the next slide. Elements of trespass. We have to prove possession, invasion, causation, and we've got a 3-year statute of limitation from when the trespass actually occurred to provide trespass. Go to the next slide. Trespass continued. Okay, to prove trespass, what are we going to have to prove? The name or chemical composition of the chemical that polluted your water, where it came from, that the defendant controlled it, how it impacted your water. So we have to actually prove the course that the contaminant took under the ground to our property to prove that it was actually caused by the fracking company next door. So obviously it's going to be very, very difficult to maintain a lawsuit if the drilling company isn't actually disclosing the chemicals that they've put into the ground. Next slide. So what would be involved if you chose to bring a lawsuit? A homeowner must usually employ an environmental firm and employ a groundwater hydrologist to map the path of the groundwater from the polluter's property to their own property to prove the path of contamination and therefore prove that the drilling caused the contamination. That cost is usually between $10,000 and $40,000 to hire a firm and complete the testing so that a lawsuit can be maintained. I mean, I've had clients that have had their property impacted and have had to actually go out and borrow money, take out a mortgage so that they could hire an environmental testing firm so that they could prove that the contamination flowed from the site where they knew it flowed from to their property, prove what the chemical constituents were, and then be able to maintain that lawsuit. And then the next slide. There's another problem. Solvency of the drilling corporation. And one of the big problems with this groundwater contamination issue is that the company that drills is not usually the company that operates the well. And they usually operate the well during the boom time when the price is high, and then they leave. And they leave the well, and then the well is transferred to somebody else, and then transferred to somebody else. Property owners come and go. And you're usually left with the poor landowner who happens to own the land where the well is. That's the person that you wind up suing. Does that person have any money? Can you actually reach the company that did the drilling? Are they going to be solvent? So that's a problem. Next slide. So, under common law, it was possible to maintain an action for nuisance or interference with your rights to quietly enjoy your property. But in its great wisdom, Michigan courts have said that a nuisance action may not be maintained without an actual showing of property damage or personal injury. So now we come back around to you have to prove personal injury or actual trespass in order to maintain an action for nuisance. That is, for the smell, for the noise, for any of the nuisance that people have been talking about here. So that is the current state of the law. Next slide. Townships, oh, that's leases. You know, I'm probably not even going to talk about leases, but townships can remedy this situation by enacting nuisance ordinances which set forth actual measurable standards for noise, for dust, for smell, for hours of operation, and set forth penalties for violations. And I think what we all need to do, part of what we need to do here, part of the takeaway is, if you're willing to help with this matter, we need to all band together. People in Oregon Township need to band together, people in Burlington Township, people in Arcadia Township, so that we form a group, go to our township, we're township residents, and we stay with our township, keep talking to the township until they enact these nuisance ordinances. Because honestly, it's the only way we're going to protect our property. If fracking happens in our neighborhoods, then we have to have these nuisance ordinances in place so that there's some way to stop the nuisance once it starts occurring. And this is if you were thinking of entering into an oil and gas lease, which I don't really think is a good idea. If you're compulsorily pooled, that is, if an oil company comes into the area and they bring a condemnation action essentially against you, take your oil and gas rights, they have to pay you a much higher price than they pay under these leases. And they have to put in some protections to protect you. If you sign an oil and gas lease, those protections simply aren't there. But if you or your neighbors are thinking of doing that, you should make sure that they employ best industry practices and that there's groundwater testing before and after. And the next slide is that every lease should contain a provision that if test results reflect a material or adverse change in your water quality, then it's presumed that that was caused by the fracking, and you need to require that the lease contains a provision that you be compensated at 3 times your property value. And there ought to be a hold harmless clause in the lease so that if fracking occurs, the people that are doing the fracking promise to hold you and your neighbors harmless from any damages that they occur. And you know, once you require those kinds of things, they're not going to be interested in you signing that lease. But, anyway, I'm trying to be really quick about it. I'll be here for questions and answers after, and we can get into some of the questions that other people talked about. What I wanted to stress here with my presentation is that the state of the law is not good for protection of a homeowner's property values. And what we have to do here is stop them from using this for hydraulic fracturing in the first place. Thank you.
Clark Tibbetts is going to offer us some other ways to protect land. Thank you.
Hey, can you listen to one more? Keep in mind, as soon as I'm finished, I think somebody else may say a couple of words, and then it's your line, and it's I'll get you through. I have one purpose, and that is to let people who are considering signing an oil and gas lease know that there is a financially viable alternative. There are, in fact, 4 financially viable alternatives that they should consider before they sign up with the oil and gas companies. And I'll tell you about those alternatives in the context of my own family story. My parents started creating their farm just outside of Columbiaville, on the east side of Columbiaville, in the 1940s. They raised horses, cattle, sheep, you name it, hay, corn, soybeans. And they also created a really beautiful farm. They created 2 lakes on the property. My dad planted 11,000 spruce trees. And that place was their pride and joy. They put their savings into it. They put their energy into it. So you can imagine how shocked I was when my dad died in 1983, and I was going through his papers, and I found a signed lease with a gas and oil company that covered our farm. At first, I just couldn't believe it was true. It was really his signature, but it was. And now I can appreciate the reason. Because he knew he had cancer at that point, and he wanted to be sure that there was enough money, cash money, to cover his expenses, and then my mother would have enough money in order to carry on after he was gone. And so I feel for now landowners who are being approached by these companies and wanting to lease their land, because some people, as a result of the Great Recession that we had in 2007, 2008, are really in bad situations in Lapeer County. And that's going to look like pretty easy money. The point I want to make is, and I'm going to tell my story about this, is that there are alternatives that people should consider. The first thing we did, first thing I did was to write to the gas and oil company and ask them if they would let me buy out the remainder of the lease. There was about 2.5 years left on the lease, and of course they refused to do that. So for 2.5 years, our family had to kind of sweat out whether or not they were going to come in. Someday a truck was going to pull in and set up a rig wherever they chose, I guess, on our property. We did get through that period. The price of oil and gas dropped, which made, I think, drilling on our particular property and in our neighborhood uneconomical for the companies. So we did run out the lease, and we got the mineral rights back in our own hands for that property. But the first thing we decided to do after that was to never let something like that happen again to our property. And we created what was called a conservation easement with an outfit called the American Farmland Trust in Washington, D.C. And that easement allowed us to continue to own the land and to continue to use it for agricultural open space purposes. But the American Farmland Trust held the development rights to the land, and they would hold those in perpetuity forever. And those development rights included the right to subdivide, create a subdivision on the property, the right to sign mineral leases, the right to do clear-cutting, timbering, and that sort of thing. So we signed up with the American Farmland Trust, had our property appraised, and found out that that act alone gave our family a one-time federal tax deduction of $90,000, which we could spread out over 5 years. And we did make use of that tax deduction. So already, with signing that conservation easement, we were doing much better than we would have ever done with the oil and gas lease. If you want to find out more about conservation easements, you don't have to go to Washington, D.C. anymore. Our farm was the first farm in Michigan to create a conservation easement with the American Farmland Trust. Now you can just go to the Lapeer Land Conservancy, which also has the ability to create conservation easements, and they can help you through the analysis of whether that makes sense for your property. And I know a lot of you don't actually own large pieces of land or farms that might be where this might be an option. But I hope you will tell my story to those people who do have farm and large pieces of land and might be considering signing an oil and gas lease. The second thing we did was to sign up with the Michigan Farmland Preservation Program. It's a very similar kind of thing, where you promise not to develop your land, you promise not to sign away any of the rights to the oil and timber rights of your land. You keep it for agricultural and open space uses, and the state of Michigan will give you an annual property tax credit. And they'll lower your property taxes down to 3.5% of your income. And we took full advantage of that. It meant that we paid much fewer property taxes each year for the last 25 years that we've been in this program than before. Now, the advantage of the Michigan Farmland Preservation Act is that you can sign up for just 10 years at a time. In case you do want to do something with your property in the way of development in the future, you don't have to commit before more than 10 years at a time. We, since we had already created a conservation easement with the American Farmland Trust, we were very comfortable in signing up for the Michigan Farmland Preservation program for a period of 99 years. So for the next, ever how many years are left, 70-some years we've got left in this program, we will have our property taxes reduced to 3.5% of our income. The third thing we did, since we had been farming the land, and it was marginal land to farm. It was a beautiful farm because of the rolling hills and lakes and wetlands. But it was not, it was what the state of Michigan at that time regarded as highly erodible land because of the steep slopes and because of the wetlands. And then the wetlands drained directly off into the Holloway Reservoir, which as of yesterday has become the source of drinking water for the city of Flint. So there was a lot of interest on the part of the Department of Agriculture to encourage farmers who had these kind of marginal land not to continue to plant crops on their lands, or not to continue to heavily graze, or to take hay off their grasslands. And we signed up for several of those conservation reserve programs with the Department of Agriculture. Each program allows you to do a different thing with the land. We conserved grasslands and hayfields. We planted native grasses. We created more wetlands. And we planted 17,000 more trees under that program. And so each year we get from the USDA, Department of Agriculture, a check, a substantial check, for having done those conservation practices on our land instead of planting crops that would have eroded the land and damaged the Saginaw Bay watershed. So with those three acts that we got into, we were able to, I think, not only come out financially ahead, we would have from the lease, but I think we would have come out financially ahead compared with the royalties we had gotten had they actually come on the land and created a gas or oil well. The one disadvantage of the Conservation Reserve Program, and my mother pointed this out to me after we were into it a good ways, was that she could no longer look out at this beautiful quilt of fields and animals and domesticated animals and so on that we had had when the place was a farm, because now it was beginning to look kind of wild. But we took that on, we did let it go to a natural state, the farm, but we created beautiful trails through it, and eventually all of the Michigan wildlife came back to this property. In fact, it only took a few years for everything to come back. Just recently we picked up beavers. We now have trumpeter swans, the indigenous swan of Michigan. And suddenly we realized that we have created a nature sanctuary. And that has been, to me, a much better future for our farm than any other future I could have imagined. The nature sanctuary is now partially under the control of the Clear Land Conservancy. It's available for the public to visit. And out in the lobby, you can pick up a brochure and come and see for yourself what we've created by getting out of that oil and gas industry. And the last thing I want to say is kind of a different sort of thing, because it's another way of using conservation practices to diminish the possibility of having oil and gas leases in our neighborhoods and in our county. And that is by reducing the amount of these fossil fuel resources that we use. In some ways I feel hypocritical by trying to protect my farm and trying to protect the land around my farm and trying to protect the land in Lapeer County from having these oil and gas leases. Because if we keep using oil and gas and other fossil fuels at the rate we're using them, that stuff has to come from somewhere. And none of the alternatives are pretty. Coal is a terrible option for creating power. Nuclear power plants are a terrible option. And so the only way out of that I can see is if we cut back on our use of those resources. And I'm not going to go through these things in great detail, but I hope you can read some of it. This is under Alternative 4. And that is, the things we can do are to downsize our houses, downsize our cars, downsize our lawns, to learn to live in smaller, more responsible environments. The other thing we can do is to be more careful about our food choices and more careful about the things that we buy. It's not necessary anymore to buy all new things when you want something. That through Craigslist, through yard sales, through thrift shops, a lot of things can be bought secondhand, and they don't carry the embedded energy that new products carry. And of course, then there's always the possibility of sharing, reusing, and recycling goods. And finally, there are the use of renewable energy sources. Now, the Tibbetts Nature Sanctuary tries to demonstrate each of those areas in which people can live with fewer natural resources. And I would invite you all to come out for a visit. You can pick up the information in the lobby, and together we will do something about this problem. Because if we can cut down on the use of these resources, if we can lower the demand, then that is the way we will eventually finally solve this problem. Thank you.
And our final speaker, we have a very brief presence from Luann Cosma of the Committee to Ban Fracking in Michigan. And is Luann still here?
I'll speak for her. She's out walking the dog.
She's what?
She's walking the dog.
She's walking the dog?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes, okay. Hi, I'm Allison Poe. Is Luann here back there? Okay, Luann is my wife. We're with the Committee to Ban Fracking in Michigan. We have envelopes out in the lobby. We're asking for contributions. What we're trying to do, as a couple of speakers have said, is to ban fracking in the state. You can do that legally. You can, if we get sufficient signatures, we need 250,000 signatures. We're going to be collecting in the year 2015, and here comes Luann, so I'll let her carry the rest of the program.
Hi, sorry, I was out walking my dog. It's his 1-year-old birthday today. I'm Luann Cosma, this is Alice Ball. We're both with the Committee to Ban Fracking in Michigan. Like 3.5 years ago, we began getting involved in this issue, and we thought that perhaps it was only going to be happening up in like the northern part of the Lower Peninsula. And we formed a group called Ban Michigan Fracking, and you can see that website, banmichiganfracking.org. And then about 2012, we realized that the entire Lower Peninsula is going to be fracked. And when we realized that, we swung into action and did a ballot initiative to do a constitutional amendment. We collected 30,000 signatures the first year. We had about 500 people across the state doing that. So we raised a lot of awareness. The second year, we decided to switch it to a legislative initiative, which means we're going to not amend the Constitution, which a lot of people just have like a problem with, but instead change the law or the state statute. And what a lot of people don't know is that it's currently the law, and it's been since the late 30s, that the DEQ is required by law to, quote, foster the industry along the most favorable conditions and with a view toward the ultimate recovery of the maximum production of these natural products, referring to oil and gas. So no regulation can go against that. I mean, the DEQ is required by law to look out for oil and gas, not for people, not for the environment, not when it comes to oil and gas wells. Their sole purpose is to put those wells in. So until we change that very basic part of the law, we can't win, you know. So we're going to ban fracking and frack waste, and that's the horizontal type of new fracking that you've been hearing about all day. And the wastes, of course, are very important because we could be getting Ohio's and Pennsylvania's. We already have received at least one shipment from Pennsylvania. And then change that other very important part of the law. So we think we've got a winning strategy. We have people all across the state, but we need many more. So we really would love to have a good team here in Lapeer County and elsewhere in the Thumb, in this area, to carry it forward. We're going to need dollars in order to hire some people where we don't have enough people, and then, and I see some people in the audience who actually worked here on the campaign. Thanks, Paul, and I don't know if Jamie is here. If anyone else did, please see me afterwards because I may not recognize your face, I just know names. So thank you for your support, and I know I don't want to take up too much of your time, but we are outside. We have the brochures right now. We have an education committee that's doing new educational materials. We've got a speakers bureau, and we're also bringing in speakers on public health impacts of fracking. We had one speaker two weeks ago named Larissa Durska from Concerned Health Professionals of New York, and she gave the most fantastic presentation on this topic. It will be on our website soon. And you can take a look at that. It's packed with information. I think what you'll see tonight in the movie, that this is really not just about water, but it's about air, and it's about the impact on people and the harm that it's causing people and animals. So thanks for this moment to share that. And we're available for questions afterwards. Thanks.
Okay, so we're going to have some time for questions and answers to those of you that want to stick around in this room. If you want to hang out in the gallery and have some food and drink and come back for the movie or whatever works for you, great. But at this point, we'd like to have Linda and Gary and Joe come up, the three of them come up, and if you'd like to ask questions, just raise your hand and direct whoever the question is to. So if you three could come up, please. Yeah, this is just going to be very brief, about 5 minutes. So again, feel free to come back and feel free to go mingle and have a break.
So I'm going to go out there and call on them. Yeah. Okay, so here's your question too, ma'am.
What is the section number South Cross Common that you know about that has the building already?
What was that? I didn't quite
What was
hear
the section number in Ross Common?
Oh, I don't know what the section number is in Ross County.
What should I do? Just call somebody locally or go there?
Oh, I would believe so, or a plat map or something like that of some sort.
Yeah, you can actually go to the Michigan DEQ, and they actually have a map that you can bring up on your computer, and it shows you all the gas wells, everything that's happening in the state of Michigan.
What was that site?
Yeah, where is the well in Mayfield Township that they're injecting?
Well, the two brine wells that I know of, I don't know about Mayfield Township, but I live in Rich Township, and there's a processing plant on 24 by Millington called Rolton Center.
They're using an injection well, where they're injecting.
Yeah, that I don't know. I don't know if anybody knows.